Did the gaps I talked about earlier this week close? Hi everyone, it's Dow on the Dow. That is what I will be showing you today. Earlier in the week, I talked about 10 tickers and pointed out some gaps to the upside and some gaps to the downside. Well, where did we end? Let's start with SOFI. I do own this stock. We ended the week at $9.71. Now, this is where we began for the week. This gap has not closed to the downside. I will extend this gap out. This line right here is today's close. This was when I began tracking it on Monday. And I actually made the video on Friday. So that again did not close out. So I will anticipate price to go that low at some point. Now to the upside, this gap that I pointed out that began at $11.10 closes out at $11.29, has not closed out. I will extend this. This is still in play. We are not in that zone. We are not even close, but something to be aware of. So I will keep track of SOFI as well for next week. I will give you some levels now to look out for price-wise where we can expect it to go. We ended the day right here. To the north side takes us to 988, 1002, 1016. This is resistance, resistance, resistance. Anticipate a sell-off whenever we hit those areas because price will not stay up there without consolidating. To the south side, at this middle line is the baseline. I always expect price to get to this level. It will get there to go to the south side or to the north side or rest along this line and consolidate before the next move. Now to the south side of that, well, first that's 959, 931, 916, and then this gap that I talked about, and -4 standard deviations takes us to 902. And I will anticipate a bounce off of this line, this, and this line as well, those lines. And for SOFI, I do see a gap that opened up. This is how I mark out my charts. So if you're new to this, it's something you may want to consider doing. The magnet is turned on and we touched right there. So when we gap up, I anticipate a gap down to close out. And that's exactly what we did. You could make little moves. I got to turn off the magnet. But I know that the gap will eventually close to the downside right there, and it did at 966. And then it started to go back up again. And this gap also formed to the upside, which means it will gap to the downside. Turn on my magnet. It has not closed, so this gap is also in play for next week. And I will anticipate this one to close out because it is in the range that I like to keep a track of. -2, the middle of the trend, and 2 standard deviations. And check this out. This is Monday, this is Friday. This is support. What happens at support? A bounce. People are buying the dip. Okay, it goes all the way to resistance, falls down, breaks through, falls back down again, closes out this gap that was formed. This is also resistance. What happens at resistance at this point? You know, collapses, falls down to support. A bounce here. So a bounce here. I anticipate a sell-off as we hit resistance, but we kind of blaze through that. A sell-off here at resistance. And from where we are right here, this line is now support. And when we're climbing up to the next level, from here to here, this turns into resistance. So you can anticipate a battle of price right through here and here on the way up. Support turns into resistance. On the way down, if this is resistance, this turns into support, support. And just clean this up right here. And this little teeny gap, but I don't look at tiny little gaps. They're going to be closed out by -2 and 2 standard deviations all day long. The next one is WMB, the Williams Company. I am in this trade. Since I pointed out, I did end up buying in at 34.68. We ended the day at 35.14. When I talked about price and the gap, we were at 34.62, it looks like. Let me move this line so I can see if any other gap formed, and it did. I'll talk about that in a second. But the gap that I pointed out to the north side started at 35.65, ended at 35.81. We are not there yet, but we are getting closer. This gap down here formed. It ripped to the upside. Oops. It went up, so I anticipate it to go down. And it touched right, let's say right about there. So that gap is no longer in play. That was a very easy tradable entry over here, get out over here when it closes out. And that closed to the downside at about 34.66. Note the sell-off at resistance, the bounce closer to support there. It doesn't always get to that line, but it got closer. And then the sell-off up here, the buy-in here. And we formed another gap. It ripped up. I anticipate the gap to close down. And this will eventually fill at about, turn off the magnet, it makes my chart look wonky there, or 34.99. I will sell my shares probably 1 or 2 pennies above the closure of the gap. I'm playing it safe. If you want to, I'll give you some levels here to look for on Tuesday when the market opens back up again. To the north side takes us to resistance, 35.47. That gap begins at roughly 35.65, 35.67. So we're basically in line with that gap. It closes out at 35.80 and 35.87. To the south side, here are your targets for Tuesday. The bounce will happen at roughly 34.67. If we get that low, 34.48 and 34.28. So this is the period I am tracking. Because this has not closed out, I will put this on my next gap trade ideas. And I'll do that on Sunday. So that's WMB. The next one is Grayscale Bitcoin Trust. I don't own this one. I do own Mara. We ended the week at 36.91, up more than 1.5%. Okay, let's talk about the gap first. When price was at 34.10, I talked about the gap to the upside there. And let me move this out of the way so you can see it better. I will extend it. Oops, didn't mean to hit that line. I want the green one. Oh, let me move that. Right, it touched right there. But I'm going to move that out of the way for a second because another gap opened up meantime. turn on my magnet. It gapped up right there. I will anticipate a gap down, and it did right there. Just a very little gap, but nonetheless a gap and a closure, a fill. So this one is no longer in play. I can erase that one. And that's the only one I was talking about. But meantime, that opened up and closed out to the downside at, oh, I've got the magnet on. It makes it wonky. Okay, 34.54. Meantime, this gap developed as well. Since I'm charting this, I might as well just complete it for you. And if you don't know how, again, to chart, this is just a simple way to do it. And I like to color code everything so that when I look at this on the monthly, the weekly, the daily time frame, I can see exactly what happened easily. All right, that gapped up. What goes up must come down. What goes down does not necessarily go back up again, but sometimes you have to get down to get back up. So this one will close out now at roughly 34.95. So here are your levels for Tuesday, the day after Christmas. I hope you have fun plans. All right. We are at the middle of the trend, grinding along this line, the middle of the trend. Sometimes we go this way, or we follow the trend up, or follow the trend down. But right now, grinding upward. The next target will be at resistance, and the level is 37.67, 38.04, and 38.41 to the south side. Support 36.20. That gap opens up at 35.97. Support, another level of support, I should say, 35.82 and 35.44. I will mark this out right here. So that's the week I just tracked. A nice upward movement, very clean for the most part. Support, bounce to resistance, the middle of the trend. There's always a battle at the middle of the trend. Then back at support, back up to resistance, sell-off, and history repeats itself. And make sure you set your stop loss because this market is kind of crazy. It will whip you out. Take all your money. All right, the next one is Citigroup. We ended the week at $50.86. I talked about it when it was at $49.83. This gap, it was a tiny little gap, I think. Well, not really that tiny, but oh, that's another one that formed. Okay. So this gap closed out right there on Monday. So we are done with this. But meantime, another gap opened up on Monday. Just a second, I gotta move that so I can see better. Right here to right there. What went up must come down. It touched right there. The gap is done. I'll move this back. It touched right there. That's done. All right. It was a small little gap to the upside at 50.27. Hit resistance, fell back down. And note the bounce at support. How much was that movement? From here to here, turn off my magnet, is about 4%. That was from Tuesday. That was all on Tuesday. A nice little move, much better than the bank, right? Oh, I was going to do a video on this date, but I never did. So let me remove that. And note this little teeny gap will take us to the south side. It is small, but it's staring at me, so I'm going to mark it out. It started right there. That will take us down to 50.62. Just a tiny little gap. All right, that's Citibank, or Citigroup, excuse me. SLB, Schlumberger. We ended the week at 53.08, up nearly 1%. And the gap that I was talking about started at 55.40, closes out at 56.39. We are not done. I will extend this out. We're still not in that range just yet, but close, closer than when we were right here. I need to move this white line so that I can see. Yep, there's a gap right there that also formed on Monday. That gap, turn on my magnet. It went up. I anticipate it to close, and it did, or right there. Move this back. Right there. So I will keep track of this one still, SLB, and put it on my list for the following week. But meantime, this other gap also opened up. Just take it week by week if there is a ticker that you like, and track it by the week. And then increase your probability of making money by buying it at roughly around -2 standard deviations and below. If you're doing these day trades, set a stop loss also so that you don't lose everything, because it will whip you around. So that is still in play. That will take us to the south side at 52.58. All right. Mark this out so you know this is the period I just covered, and this did not close out. This has not closed out either to the downside that I've been tracking. So I will extend that out. Closes out at 49.22. The next one is Johnson Controls. Ended the week at 56.74. All right, this was a nice grind to the upside for the movements here. 52.44 when I last looked at it. Talked about this gap at 54.03 that closed out. All I do is extend it. Make this a little bit bigger so you can see. All right. And it touched right there. We are done with this gap. I will erase that. No longer in play. This one from 55.25 to 56.56 is still in play. So that means, oh no, I'm sorry, it closed out. Money, money, money. Right here, closed out. Right there. Okay. So let me erase that. Meantime, does that knock you over there? That just sticks out. I love gap plays. This for me is not investing. These are just quick little trades. Well, sometimes quick, I should say, but gives you a better probability with a gap also. Better probability of winning. Okay, so I will anticipate price to get down to here at some point, and I don't know when, because we're not in that range, but something to be aware of. And that's done. There was another one, the line covered, it's so tiny I'm not going to bother. So that's done. I don't know why I have it marked at 67. Ignore that. It's probably old price targets that I marked for myself. All right, that is the time period that we are looking at. So good job if you made some money off of this trade. And that would be a return of roughly, oh, I like the magnet and I hate the magnet at the same time. 9% right there. All right. Oh, one other thing that you might want to do is keep track of support and resistance. So what I like to do, and I delete this most of the time for myself so you don't see an ugly chart all the time, is mark out my -2 and 2 standard deviations. And you will note that price bounces off either those lines, the linear lines, or off of the horizontal lines that you draw. It will shock you, the patterns you see. All right. The next one, NDAQ. See, doesn't that just kick you in the face right there? And then that W, if you trade patterns. All right, the last time I talked about this was at 54.74. We ended at 57.04. I will extend this gap and look at it right there. Looky, looky. We closed at 56.09, extended out. This is done. This gap is no longer in play. And this gap we will have to contend with now to the downside. So expect price to go down to this level to close out at some point right there. This will take us to, turn off my magnet. $56.12. Oh, for some reason I have all of these price points marked out too for myself. So that I'm going to go ahead and delete. At some point I will anticipate price to hit this wall right here and then maybe go back down to here. That's what I mean about marking -2, the middle of the trend, and 2 standard deviations. So the middle will take us to here. And this video is starting to get very long, so I'm going to stop with all of this and rip through this. This gap is still in play to the downside at 52.12. The next one, GIS, General Mills. Price was at 65.22. Look at this downward slope. But I mentioned a gap right here that takes us to 66.28, and we closed out. Let's just take it right there. Remove, and then we hit resistance, fell back down, busted through, and now, move this so you can see that better. So support, resistance, grinds along the middle of the trend, up, and then another level of resistance. And then look at that. I don't care what the news is, what it is, but we gap down, so we will fill eventually. There will be some market excuse to fill that gap. Just track it for yourself, and you will make money. Not right away, but you will. And to the north side, nope. On the 10th, this was the target that I marked out. So we are here. This will close out. Okay, for Tuesday, expect 64.84 and then a sell-off because we will be at resistance. If we make it to the next level, that will be closing out, beginning of that gap, 65.34-ish, 65.89, closing out at 66.70. To the south side, 63.76, 62.69, I will anticipate a bounce, 62.15, another bounce, 61.64, another bounce. Baba, oh Baba, I do own this. I own SOFI, this one, and that's it for this. All right, we ended the week at 75.28. Look at all the gaps that formed. Ugh, nasty. All right. When I talked about this stock, we were at 74.51. I will move this out of the way so I can see. We gapped down, so I anticipate a gap up. So I will extend this one out. It was at 74.47. Bingo, did it. So we are done there. The next gap I pointed out was at 75.17, closes out at 76.70. I will extend that out to today. Did we hit it? No. Close, no cigar. So this will still be in play. And that's Baba. I'm gonna write this down. And this other gap that I talked about right here is still in play. I'll stagger them so that way it doesn't get wonky. You can't tell what was what. And this one is still in play. Takes us out to 78.46. Okay. Meantime, this gap, we gapped down, this one gapped up, and that happened on Monday. So we are done here. Did a gap? Oh, this gap I also tracked. I will extend. And then there's a new gap right there too, I think. No. All right, so we've got a gap still in play that takes us down to 72.54. So a better entry point if you're trying to get in, but also look for other gaps to the south side. It's starting to look like a mess there, but I know exactly what it all means. So it's not messy to me. It's probably a nightmare for you to look at. All right, price-wise, here we go. 76.27. 76.78 and 77.26. But again, if you stay within -2, and 2 standard deviations, that is a safer play. Or you buy down here along these lines or down at the gap for a potential ride up to the middle of the trend and dump out. Get out if you like to play more conservatively with your money. All right, I'm done talking about that one. The next one is ORCL, 106.20. This stock had a gap. Oh, when I talked about it, it was here. This gap started at 104.89. And look at that, takes us to 114.90. This gap is still in play. I will extend it out. Let me move this back to Friday. That gap is done. When I talked about it, price was at 103.13. But if this move plays out, turn off my magnet. If this move plays out and closes out this gap, that is a return of roughly 11%. Of course, a lot of pain in between, up and down, rip your face off. But if you are patient and the trade works in your favor, it could give you some good rewards. Now, I see another gap that formed right here. Turn on my magnet to get a better reading, extend it out. So we've got some pain also to the downside at roughly 104.28. All right. Now for your price targets. $106.77, $107.31, $107.83 for Tuesday, $105.70, safe bet. The gap begins at nearly that -2 standard deviations area, so I'll just say 104.62 closes out at 104.30. Another buy zone here, 104.09 and 103.56. I will anticipate a bounce when we close out this gap because we are at support. Look at this nice bounce here at support. Google, 141.49 is where we ended. All right, I will be talking again about this period from Monday to Friday. So what happened here? I talked about it at 132.60. There's this gap that I have been tracking, and it closed out right there on Monday the 18th. This gap is no longer in play. Done. Move this back. Meantime, that little gap opened up, and it closes out at okay, there's some pain ahead of us to the downside at roughly 136-ish. Okay, meantime, another gap opened up. There, and that takes us down to roughly 136.72. And I'll just mark this one. Oh, and don't forget that one as well. So we've got some downward pressure ahead of us. What goes up must come down. So right there, that will take us to 138.71, 139.39, and that tiny little one I'm not gonna bother because it will close out, but that's at 140.49. Note the sell-off at resistance. I don't care what the news is. I just know it's gonna happen. I don't even have to pay attention to the news. Sell off at resistance, buy in at support, trade it all day long. And of course, that is just my opinion. And then obviously look at the technicals, the fundamentals. Where are we going price-wise? Look at this, 153.74. Hit the forecast button. Here are your price projections on TradingView. So the downside, 129. What are we at? 141.49 current. Going to 153.74 to the upside and 180. All right. All right. The next target though is 142.07, 144.19, 145.27, 146.36, 139.82, 138.76 closes at that gap. When we get to that level, 137.64. Okay, and then more downward pressure with these gaps. So if you're hoping to get Google at a better price, you could wait, or you could short, or kind of in everything in between. And then obviously look at the different time frames, gives you different buy and sell signals. And I don't know what your objective is. Are you investing, day trading, scalping, swing trading? I'm just doing, well, I have lots of investments, but I'm trying to do more swing trades, and I will be doing more gap trades and scalping in and getting out. That's what I'm going to try to do, because you hear about all this doom and gloom. So that's why you need to set your stop loss and don't linger if you're trying to take profit. All right, when I talked about this, price was at 147. We went up. Did this gap close? Well, I'm going to move this white line out of the way first so I can see. Okay, I talked about this little gap. And we closed out, let's just say we're right about there at 152.96. So we went up, touched it, went down, back to support, and then grinding our way back up, and we touched it right here on the way up. So that's how you track your gap. Let me move this back over here. All right, then on the way up, we gapped up. Then that means there's a gap to contend with on the downside. So you cannot expect price to keep going up without taking a breather. So we touched right about there, and that played out at roughly 161.15. I know that we are near support. What happens at support? You know the drill. Then there was this little one that closed to the downside at 163.69. And now let me give you some levels. 176.75, 182.93, 185.99, and 189.04. To the south side, 170.60, 167.63, 164.54. And finally, I will talk about Coinbase. Oh no, that's CI. Sorry, that was Coin I just did. CI is the final one, the Cigna Group. All right. When I talked about this stock, it was at 290.51. Sorry, 290.50. And I talked about this gap to the upside. All right, we touched it right about there. Done. No longer in play. Bummer, that was a good move. But we went sideways, basically. We touched this, and look at that resistance. Boom. A meltdown. It went up here. Things don't melt up. It's not like butter. Butter melts. Ice melts. So when I hear people say melt up, it drives me bonkers. It doesn't, things don't melt up. It does go up, but not melting up. That makes no sense to me. All right. That gap is done. I don't really see any other ones to point out, but obviously if you flip this to the bigger time frame, go to the hour, the daily, the weekly, the monthly, you could potentially see bigger gaps. Now, there's this monster gap to the downside. This is a meltdown right here when this happens. It's not going to happen in one day. Tons of trades in between, but eventually it's going to get down to here. I don't know when, but it will. Be prepared for that. That takes us down to 259.08. It started at 294.40. And that is all I have to say about the Cigna Group. But that's a nice move here. Up, bounce up, sells off, bounces back up at resistance. And let me see this move. I got to turn off my magnet. This move to this move is a 12% decline. So that's it. Now, the stocks again that did not close out, they are SOFI, WMB, SLB, and BABA. So those will be on my list for next week. So every week I'm going to try to do 10, and I'm going to try to get involved in potentially one of them. But if I already own it, I'm not going to, but I will sell out if I do touch a gap that I like. All right, that does it for me. Thank you so much for watching. Have a wonderful weekend, and I will make another video with some gap plays on Sunday. Maybe I'll call it the Sunday Stock Watch again. Murat knows what I'm talking about, but they really are gaps. And then I'm gonna do another video on the monthly time frame of more than 250 tickers that I am watching within Vanguard's Total Stock Market Index Fund. And I'm gonna blaze through it and show you how I pick stocks to invest in. Have a great weekend, everyone.